Hello, I am Ofelia Pascarza. I am a mother, a poet, and a cultural worker or cultural promotora from the Oak Cliff area. I am playing Chavela Vargas right now, her song Llorona, and she's an iconic ranchera singer from Mexico. And her singing always just reminds me of this time of the year. And my grandfather was a aficionado of like ranchero music, and so I figure we would just kind of listen to her for a little bit while we get started, and then I'll kind of turn the volume down, and we'll have a little plática or a chat. And the other thing that I also want to do before we start the plática or the chat is I want to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement. I live in Dallas, and I am in the Oak Cliff area. And the area that I live in right now was the ancestral land of the Kickapoo, Tawakani, the Caddo, the Wichita. The Comanche and the Kiowa also lived in this region. And this is also the home to families that were relocated to North Texas as part of the Indian Relocation Act. And so it's really important to acknowledge the land that we're on, especially when we talk about something like Day of the Dead and Dia de los Muertos, because the roots to these traditions are indigenous. And even if they weren't, I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. Even if it wasn't a celebration or something that's rooted in indigenous traditions, it's always respectful to remember and honor the people that were here before us. And I just wanted to start with that. So the plática that we're going to have today is, and I'm going to turn the volume down a little more. The playlist that I'm listening to is one that is put together from different songs that people have sent over the last couple of years on Day of the Dead that remind them of different loved ones and family members. And so it's kind of a way to do an auditory exploration and remembrance too. So I'll share it's on Spotify, and I'll share our website and everything at the end. But I'm basically here to talk to you a little bit about Day of the Dead and what that is, what the history is for it, the significance, and just information on it, I guess. It obviously would have been a lot more fun and interesting, I think, if it had been interactive, but it is what it is, right? So Day of the Dead, everybody, I think right now it's gotten so popular and so not mainstream, but it kind of has become a little more common, and more people know what Day of the Dead is all about. And it wasn't always the case, but sometimes people have this idea that it's Mexican holiday, Halloween, and it's not. It's not Mexican Halloween. It falls around the same time, but it's not. It's something very different and very Mexican. And the way the Day of the Dead is celebrated here in the United States is very Mexican. Day of the Dead is celebrated in other countries and in the Americas as well. In Guatemala, it looks a little different. In Central America and South America, most indigenous traditions have these celebrations that honor and remember ancestors. And it's not indigenous just to the Americas, it's indigenous traditions in Europe, traditional ceremonies and festivities in Asia and Africa, in the Pacific Islands, all around the world. There are traditions and the celebrations to remember the ancestors and remember who you come from, and remember those that have left, our realm. But the way that Day of the Dead is celebrated here in the US is very Mexican, the sugar skulls and all of that. And we'll talk a little more about that as well. But it really is a day of remembrance. It's actually 2 days. It's November 1st and November 2nd. And November 1st is typically reserved for what we call Los Angelitos, the little angels. And it's children that have died, babies that have been still births, and children that have died at different ages, but it's children. November 2nd is Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos, and that's when you remember everyone else. And so that'll be Monday and Tuesday. It also is something that is very rooted in Indigenous tradition. But as time has kind of gone by, and because of the colonization of the Americas, it has a very Catholic and Christian kind of intermingling. And so you see a lot of religious iconography that's a part of it as well, and especially Catholic and Catholic saints and images. And so it really is a blending of the cultures. And it's a blending also of, because in Mexico, you have different cultures as well. You have the indigenous traditions. We have the Afro-Latinos, the Afro-Mexicans. And so you have some blending of the African traditions, and you have a mix of everything. We had the French that were in Mexico. And so you have this kind of very blended history, and that kind of has been passed along with our celebrations and our festivities. But kind of like if we did a Day of the Dead 101, it is November 1st and November 2nd. It remembers those that have kind of left our world and have crossed over into the spirit world. And it is, and it kind of varies, because for some people it has a very spiritual component. For other people, it's just very cultural. And there isn't really a wrong way to celebrate this. For those that are religious and spiritual, then they incorporate prayer and maybe rosaries and things like that. And for those that it's more just a cultural piece, then it really is more just kind of the color and the celebration and the festivities. But what I have here is a miniature version of an ofrenda. And an ofrenda is an altar, and ofrenda means offering. And so that really is what it is. It's an offering that we set up for our loved ones. The idea is that on November 1st and 2nd, the veil is very thin between the spirit world and our world. And so there's a lot of fluidity. And the thought is that on those days, the spirits that never really leave us, the spirits have a way of kind of coming back and forth. And so on those days, we like openly welcome them into our home. And we do that by setting up altars or ofrendas for them, where we put offerings out for them. And so typically an ofrenda will have layers. You definitely have like the 3 layers. And so you have it 1, 2, 3. And the significance of the layers is that this is the underworld, this is our world, and then this is the spirit world or the heavens. And sometimes you'll see some that are very like elaborate and have 7 layers, and 7 is there's significance to that number too. But you have layers, and you also have certain elements that are always present. Because it's an offering to the spirits of our loved ones, and because we're welcoming them into our home, and they're traveling to us from, this long trip from the underworld to our world, then we have drinks for them. We have water. You have their favorite beverages. You have coffee, you have soda, beer, tequila, mezcal, whatever it was that they liked to drink, you have it on the altar for them. You have their favorite foods too. And so, like, I made some little mini, I'll show you some pan dulce. So it's like little mini, little empanada. And I just kind of had fun with this one. But I made like a little bowl of pan dulce. One of the breads that you typically have is called pan de muerto, or bread of the dead. And it looks similar to this. And so the idea with the pan de muerto is that it represents the bones. And so the bread actually has, the dough is shaped kind of to look like bones on it. And it's a delicious bread. It's like very yeasty and has like an orange flavor to it, like an orange essence. And it's really amazing bread. You have, like, I have some fruit here. You have plates of food for them. My brother-in-law loved pizza and beer, so we always put out a slice of pizza. We put out Budweiser because that's what he liked to drink. And you put out candy, just things to kind of entice them to come visit you. You also always have different elements represented. So you have things like salt, because salt comes from the earth, and salt is for cleansing also. You would use salt to cleanse. You have the water. Usually you have something that represents the earth. And so, like in this case, I have the fruit. I have like a little teeny tiny, let me see if I can pull it off without like totally dropping it. I have a little bowl with like little fruits that I made: pomegranates, cactus, papaya, mangoes, jicama, and that represents the earth. You could also have plants. Like I have these little cacti here. You could have plants there, anything that just represents the earth. You have, like I said, the water, and then you have the air represented, and that would be represented by the papel picado. And papel picado is tissue paper that's been cut out with these elaborate designs. And so the idea is that the papel picado, because it's so thin, it's tissue paper, it allows spirits to flow back and forth, and then it shows us when the wind is blowing. And so there's always papel picado, and there's fire. And so the fire would be in the form of candles, because those are the elements that, we have represented within our bodies. Those are the elements that come from the earth. And so you always have fire. Another thing that you always have is you have skulls. So like here's a little mini calavera. I have another representation of the calavera here in this picture frame. You always have skulls, and again, that's just representing death. You have flowers, and the traditional flower is cempasúchil, and I always butcher that, but it's marigold, and it's known as like the flor de los muertos, the flower of the dead. And cempasúchil has like a very strong scent, and so what they say is that that scent draws them to us. And so you always have them, and I have some little tissue paper flowers that I made here, and then I have like the artificial flowers. Ideally you would have fresh flowers on your altar, You could make a path with the petals as well. And that's kind of what I did with this. I'll show you. Kind of made a little bit of a path on this. And I have like a little salt cross here. And that's very typical also. You would have elaborate designs on a rug or a tapete. And the rug is there because, again, it's a long journey. And so you want to provide places for them to rest. Um, but you would make like a little path to kind of welcome them. And you could make the path long, short. It just really depends on your space. So like I said, you have some rugs for them to sit on, chairs, pillows, just really create a cozy, comfy space. You have like religious iconography. I have a Lady of Guadalupe because my grandfather, that was his patron saint. Um, Another thing that you always find on altares is the monarch butterfly. This is a monarch that one of my writer friends made. Um, and so you can kind of see it here. This is a clay monarch, but you always have monarchs, the butterflies represented on there as well, because um, the stories are that the monarchs are the spirits of our loved ones returning, and they do migrate to Mexico at this time of the year. So this is their migration period. And so in Mexico, they say that those are the spirits of our loved ones returning to their homeland. And so you typically have monarch butterflies. Hummingbirds are another animal that you'll see a lot of sometimes. And they say that, again, in indigenous tradition, the hummingbird is the carrier of spirits. You have shiny, glittery things. You have candles because the candles light the way for them as well. Um, and again, this is all very Mexican. In Guatemala, for instance, for Day of the Dead, they have a lot of kites. They use like these beautiful, like enormous, elaborate kites, and it's more of like a kite festival almost, that you would see. And but this is traditionally like what you would find here for Day of the Dead, and it is very Mexican. Um, the other thing that you find a lot of for Day of the Dead is the Catrina makeup, the Calavera makeup. And the Catrina is basically death, and it's the skeleton. And the Catrina and the idea of like all of these kind of caricatures of death that you see, like the skeletons with the fancy dresses and the kind of mocking life. You see like all of these calaveras and skeletons positioned in like real life poses and doing things like that. And that actually was something that was started by an artist called Posada, who used he would make prints of the calaveras and the Catrinas, kind of making fun of the wealthy and making fun of the aristocrats in Mexico, like around the time of the revolution. And um, that's something that really kind of has become like intermeshed and intertwined with Day of the Dead. Um, but it's kind of a way of like just laughing at death and just kind of laughing at kind of this idea that death is scary, or death is sad, um, because it's a very Mexican thing to acknowledge that life and death are kind of one and the same. They're part of this natural cycle of life. We're born, we live, we die. And through traditions like this, we're kept alive. In the movie Coco, they talk about the only way that somebody really dies is when you forget them. And so that just ties into that Mexican idea of family and connectedness and just staying together, and the keeping of our traditions and our stories alive. Um, And that's a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of times people are very drawn to this for a lot of reasons, because it's beautiful. Obviously, the colors, and you have food, you have music, you listen to music on Day of the Dead too. You dance. It's sad because you miss your loved ones, but then at the same time, it's not, because you're celebrating their life. You continue to celebrate them, and you continue to keep them alive. I know, like in my family, with my children, um, sometimes they say they feel like they know my grandfather, even though they never met him. He died before they were even a thought in my mind. Um, but they feel like they know him because for Day of the Dead, we put out his favorite candy and we have coffee, and he liked to drink. They call it café con piquete, like coffee with like a punch, and that he would add liquor to his coffee. And so we have that out for him. And so they feel like they know him. And we also remember our pets, because our pets are family too. And so, like on my home altar, we have um, something to remind us of our pets, and our Great Dane that we had, and our cats that have died. And so it really is about remembering and celebrating, and just kind of acknowledging that you come from something bigger than yourself. And I think it's really important for us to always remember that we come from something, we come from someone, and whether it's celebrating Day of the Dead, or looking into the traditions for your community, it's really important to just kind of keep those connections alive and strong. Um, Something that I do want to share with you, and I'm gonna kind of, I feel like I'm kind of rambling a little bit at this point now, so I'll probably cut it short here. But I do want to say that um, it's not a theme, and Day of the Dead is really something important, and that's why I think, like, I feel very protective of it, and I always make sure to remind people that it's not a theme. It's not, um, yes, you can wear the makeup like a Catrina, and you can dress up on Day of the Dead like a Catrina, but it's not a costume. It. There's something like that's a lot deeper. Um, Again, when you don the makeup, you're putting that makeup on to say to yourself and to the world, like, I acknowledge that, life and death, you know, they're like this. And um, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to slap some makeup on and go party. And no, there's a depth to these celebrations and these traditions that is so, I mean, it's thousands of years old, and it's woven in with like family and stories and history. And so it's just really important to remember that as the holiday and the festivities get more and more mainstream, that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing for a lot of us. um, but just to remember to participate in them respectfully, and that they're about honoring and remembering, and not just like, oh, it's a time to get drunk, it's a time to party, it's a time to wear like crazy makeup, or these cool like flower headdresses. And um, because for those of us that have grown up with these traditions, and for those of us that um, continue to keep these traditions alive, it is something that is so heartfelt, and it's comforting, especially right now during this time where we've lost so much and so many loved ones. And it's about like comfort and celebration, and just so I'll leave you with that. Just remember that it's not a theme, it's not um costumes. This is something that's very, it's beautiful, and it's not sacred in a religious sense, but something that's worthy of being respected. And I want to share with you my information so that if you want to ever get in touch with me or feel like there's something you'd like to ask, feel free to do that. I'll share my info with you here. And I do have a website, and I'll go through that real quick. Let's see. Technology is not my thing, so we kind of went through that. But this is the website if you ever want to go to it and visit. I do an ofrenda tour every year. And what we do is we partner up with local community artists, and we set up altars in different community spaces and local businesses. And we talk about what Day of the Dead is, and this kind of has a little bit of our information and some samples of examples of some of the artists' work. And every year we have different artists that participate in it. And let me see here. We also have a virtual ofrenda. So if you were inclined to share some of your memories and videos and things like that, I'll be happy to email you the link to our virtual ofrenda, and you can send pieces to us for that. And let's see here. Like I said, technology is just not my friend, but this is my information. I am with Cascabel Group, and this is my email, cascabelgroup@gmail.com. And my phone number is 214-325-1421. And I'm always happy to answer questions that you might have, or just share more information with you. And I think that'll be it. So it was just a pleasure to speak to everybody, and I hope that you have an opportunity to celebrate with your loved ones on November 1st and 2nd, in whatever way feels right for you. Even if it's just kind of sitting around the table and enjoying some meals that maybe your loved ones liked, or just remembering them. And there's some beautiful energy, and this is a beautiful time of the year for reflection. So I hope you enjoy your time on November 1st and 2nd, and that you have lots of memories to share with others, and that you have an opportunity to experience and to see an altar out in the community sometime soon. Thank you and goodbye.